There's no reason to even be diplomatic about this. Kamala Harris sucks. She may be a very nice person. She may be a very nice person personally, but Kamala Harris is really bad at being vice president. Just for example, one small example here. Yesterday was the Sunday before the State of the Union address. Yesterday was the Sunday before the State of the Union address. It should be notable that Kamala Harris was not everywhere as a surrogate for the President of the United States in the run-up to his State of the Union address. She was not. And now the New York Times has yet another article on just how bad it is. Here's the headline. Kamala Harris is trying to define her vice presidency. Even her allies are tired of waiting. Ms. Harris is struggling to carve out a lane for herself in what may be one of the most consequential periods for the vice presidency. This is a Today piece. The problem here is that it is running today, but there have been a series of pieces in a series of news outlets, including the Washington Post and the New York Times and others, over the past month about her problems. This is just the latest. Kamala Harris was frustrated. The text of a speech she had been given to deliver in Chicago to the nation's biggest teachers union was just another dreary, scripted talk that said little of any consequence. As Air Force Two made its way to the Midwest over the summer, the vice president told her staff she wanted to say something more significant, more direct. She brandished a Rolling Stone magazine article about the backlash against Florida school officials after new legislation barring the discussion of gender identity in the classroom. The teachers she was about to address were on the front lines of the nation's culture wars, Ms. Harris told her staff. They were the same ones on the front lines of school shootings. Just blandly ticking through federal funding for education would not be enough. The plane was just over an hour out from Chicago, but she said they needed to start over. By the time she landed, she had a more spirited version of the speech in hand, accusing extremist so-called leaders of the Republican Party of taking away rights and freedoms. Ms. Harris's small airborne rebellion that day encapsulated the trap she finds herself in. She has already made history as the first woman, the first African American, and the first Asian American ever to serve as president. She has still struggled to define her role much beyond that legacy. Now let me skip down and just read you one more here. The painful reality for Ms. Harris is that in private conversations over the last few months, dozens of Democrats in the White House, on Capitol Hill, and around the nation, including some who helped put her on the party's 2020 ticket, said she had not risen to the challenge of proving herself as a future leader of the party, much less the country. Even some Democrats, whom her own advisors referred reporters to for supportive quotes, confided privately that they had lost hope in her. Let me say this one again. This last sentence in this paragraph of a very lengthy story that goes on and on and on and on and on. This is a very lengthy piece. A very lengthy piece. And in it includes this sentence. This sentence is in the New York Times about Kamala Harris and a piece about her leadership, her being vice president. Get this. Again, this is from the New York Times. Even some Democrats whom her own advisors referred reporters to for supportive quotes confided privately they had lost hope in her. That's the New York Times reporting that. In other words, Kamala Harris's staff said you can go get good quotes about the vice president from these people. The New York Times went to the people Kamala Harris's staff referred them to, and when they spoke to those people said, no, we've lost hope in her. Wow. Kamala Harris is a disaster. She is a political disaster. Her speeches are so dumb that even I think Kamala Harris realizes how dumb her speeches are. Kamala Harris's speeches, they're just not good. There was one I found the other day of her speaking, and she was speaking about, I'm seeing if I can pull it up now. Yeah, here we go. Let's see. Can I pull this up? Does this actually work here?
Which brings me to May 30th, 2020.
Yeah, okay. I got to pull this up because this is so bad. You're not going to actually believe how bad this is until you hear it for yourself. And I genuinely was stunned that this is a speech that Kamala Harris would give. This is one of the most cringeworthy things I have ever heard a political leader say in my life. This is Kamala Harris giving a speech about NASA and the rocket program, and it is
to May 30th, 2020. Bob and Doug returned to the Kennedy Space Center. They suited up, they waved to their families, and they rode an elevator up nearly 20 stories. They strapped in to their seats and waited as the tanks beneath them filled with tens of thousands of gallons of fuel. And then they launched. Yeah, they did.
That's a typical Kamala Harris speech. She laughs at lines like that. And what's so funny is she's actually doing that. They suit up and she does this, and they rode an elevator up and she launches her finger up, and then it's like a fist bump. They launched. Yeah, they did. And she points to the crowd laughing. She wasn't talking to an elementary school class. She was talking to grown-ups, and she did that. Kamala Harris is a bad politician. Kamala Harris never made it to Iowa. She never made it to Iowa. You know, she didn't have a lot of political experience in Washington either. Kamala Harris had been an attorney, a district attorney in San Francisco. She became the attorney general in California. She got elected to the United States Senate. She wasn't there that long, and she decided she would run for president. She believed the press about herself, and that's part of the problem in Washington, is never believe the press about yourself. But she did. This is again from the New York Times. Most Democrats interviewed who insisted on anonymity to avoid alienating the White House said flatly they did not think Ms. Harris could win the presidency in 2024. Some said the party's biggest challenge would be finding a way to sideline her without inflaming key Democratic constituencies that would take offense. Now, with Mr. Biden appearing all but certain to run again, the concern over Ms. Harris has shifted to whether she will be a political liability for the ticket. Given that Mr. Biden at 80 is already the oldest president in American history, Republicans would most likely make Ms. Harris, who is 58, a prime attack line, arguing that a vote for Mr. Biden may, in fact, be a vote to put her in the Oval Office. In other words, Democrats are now thinking instead of having a Joe Biden problem, they have a Kamala Harris problem, and how can they push her out and get a different vice president? Now, the same thing happened, you should understand. There were all sorts of rumors that Donald Trump would push out Mike Pence. There were rumors that Obama would push out Biden. There were rumors that Bush would push out Cheney. This happens every 4 years when a vice president's critics gang up on them in the press. The most significant one was 1992 when Dan Quayle's critics went after him. The difference between Quayle and Harris is only that the media is sympathetic to Democrats. Otherwise, Kamala Harris would be getting the Dan Quayle treatment right now. And it was beyond dispute. Dan Quayle is a very smart, bright guy. but the vice presidential office did him no favors in making him look competent. Kamala Harris, I don't know that she's bright, but you don't get to the vice presidency of the United States without having some smarts, I would think, and she's just not good at it. Every time she opens her mouth, she says something absurd. Every time she does something, she winds up giving one of those awkward laughs. She's just not good at the job of vice president. She's not good at being in the limelight. And her staff behind the scenes has leaked terrible things about her. They've said she's unprepared. She doesn't do the prep. She doesn't put in the time for the work. When it blows up in her face, she yells at her staff. She blames her staff for everything. She's had massively high staff turnover. And this goes back to her time in the Senate when the rumors have been she's an extraordinarily difficult person to work with who doesn't have the self-awareness to know that she's just not all that bright. And now you've got Democrats. And again, this is the key point here, is that the Democrats, her own advisors refer reporters to for favorable quotes about Kamala Harris, said they've lost hope in her. But Biden can't really make a change. The Democrats have become too intersectional, have they not? You throw out the first Asian American black female vice president. I mean, Kamala Harris is BIPOC. This is what all the whites use these days. The rich white liberals, BIPOC, black, indigenous people of color, the BIPOCs. Kamala Harris is like the BIPOC in chief. You can't throw the BIPOC in chief out the door. You can't do that without alienating the BIPOC people of America. You're going to have deep pieces from the New York Times about how if she were a man, he wouldn't do this. If she were white, he wouldn't do this. He's kind of stuck with her. You brought her to the dance, Joe. You're stuck with her. And Democrats are signaling behind the scenes of the New York Times, you need to get rid of her. And you can't get rid of her. But the Republicans will hold her over your head come 2024.